Oh, hello. I am so happy to be here and to be back doing this. Welcome to Invisible Thread with Evelyn Block. Hey, I'm Evelyn. Um, I am so happy to be here as we enter into season 2 of this podcast. I was very surprised at the results of season 1 uh, in my life at large, but also in just the life lessons that I took from those conversations and that experience. So, moving into season 2 has been a really cool follow up reflection space on the first season, but then also the process of collecting myself to be prepared for this second season. The second season is same, but different. Um, it's following the thread of the first season in terms of continuing to be enamored and endlessly curious about the guests that are coming on to the show to have conversations with me and all of us. But it's a little bit more focused this time around. So, themes that came out of the first season were connection and nature. With as diverse as the guest set was for the first season, it's equally as diverse this second time around, but again, a little bit more focused. So I would say there's a more foundational exploration in guests' lives personally and in careers as to how nature, connectivity, sustainability informed what they're doing and their decision making processes. Um, for myself, this season, I'm hoping to make it a little bit more reflective. I'd love to have some shorter episodes where I'm just getting to talk through some of the conversations that are happening and coming up and sort of bring some really influential parts into this narrative that I haven't yet brought into these conversations. So we wrapped up sort of at the end of the spring, early summer this year. And I took this summer to travel a little bit and record in a few different capacities that are also a bit different from the first season. So in this season, kind of took the podcast on the road, experimented with recording in different locations, whether that was just me or myself and a participant recording in person with different mic setups. I've been experimenting with editing and what that looks like, really picking producers' minds, whether that's in the podcast field or entertainment, like film, TV world. Producing is so much more than you ever could have imagined. So to get to be, doing this part, the hi, I'm Evelyn, this is my face, we're conversing, to the back end of like, how am I going to edit this together so that I feel like it makes sense? How much do I need to edit? Often with my conversations, I'm not editing for content, I'm editing more for time. I do have a goal of experimenting with shortening episodes this season. I love kind of like long form content. I'm happy myself to listen to a really long podcast as I'm like doing something in the house, or, putting on someone's album and just like listening all the way through as I'm doing whatever I'm doing. But I feel like sometimes we don't have the full attention capacity to really sit down and absorb, an hour plus of a conversation that we are not actively a part of. I find that when I'm talking to my girlfriends or family, whatever, an hour passes by like that. But sometimes if I'm listening to something where it's a little bit more informative or educational, or it just serves a different purpose, it totally depends. Sometimes I can absolutely have that be background uh, substance, and sometimes it just needs to be a sit down, listen, and take notes kind of situation. Um, so this time around, I am trying to play with shorter forms of the podcast, but also not, removing any really juicy bits. And sometimes the punchline of the story is as good as its lead up. So that's really hard when you don't want to skew a narrative that someone so graciously is sharing with you, but you also need to account for modern day attention spans and how to best get a message across in a way that someone still is like receiving how potent that message is. So that's been a very fun experiment to move through this season. And through the recording process and just sort of preparation process of this coming season, I also jumped back into agriculture and worked on a farm this summer for a little bit, visited some friends between podcast recordings, had some really beautiful personal conversations with people that felt really inspiring, and also continued, working, doing herbal consultations, participating in landscape design projects, really just feeding my career in all the ways that feel really great and juicy to me. Something I also really wanted to talk about is there's this whole spiritual side, I feel, of what I am doing right now. And I haven't yet come up with another way to frame it outside of spirituality, because that's really how it's spirituality, maybe like belief system. Uh, with everything that's been happening and unfolding in my life, I have found that my intuition is by far like the most powerful tool that I have in my tool belt. And that is such a flex because when we are navigating via our intuition, let me rewind and like speak for me actually. When I'm navigating via my intuition, an external perspective may come in. I may even invite them in, like, hey, what do you think about this? I've been having these ideas. Like, what's your perspective? That perspective can be really validating. It can also sometimes be really difficult to hear, especially when in your guts, you already know what you want to do or how you want something to play out. And if someone agrees with you, great. if they don't, that invites all of a sudden so much more room for doubt. And I also think it's a different type of invitation that's asking you to like double down on whatever your intuition was telling you, or to like get out of Dodge fast. It's, just another mirror that's kind of held up to your decision making process. And from that point, I think it becomes really clear whatever your intuition is telling you, like what you're really going to do. There is such a nugget of gold that Frankie Telfort shared in my conversation with him in the first season, where he touched on kind of analysis paralysis and the freezing in the decision making process when we're either overwhelmed by the decision itself or maybe overwhelmed by too many options. There could be, a plethora of reasons that this type of paralysis might happen to someone. But I really think it was such gold because in the end, at this point, I'm definitely a firm believer that we really know what's best for us already. Like, if we're being really truthful with ourselves, which is sometimes like the hardest place to be the most truthful, so much of our life is painted by our choices. And if we're at a crossroads or we're faced with a difficult or large decision, we our true colors can really, show up in those moments in a multitude of ways. But as I was moving through these various processes this summer, there were these guiding lights that were kind of handed to me through these past few months, and some really, really good gifts that I wanted to kind of bring to the forefront of this conversation, since I opened this up with, this exploration of spirituality, or however we want to identify with that, whether it's religion or a way of thinking and leading our lives, or a political perspective, however you want to frame how you make decisions and why. But they're so in this process that I feel like is a really magical process, if you can be strong and brave and clear through it, are the breadcrumbs that the universe is leaving all of us to hopefully support us in living our highest and best lives, being the highest and best versions of ourselves. And all of this is negotiable. So, like, I think part of the love that I have from humanity for humanity is, no matter who you are, if you are human, you are a dual natured being, which feels really important because it's this way of thinking and almost an iconography that is so prevalent throughout history and different cultural spaces. Like, the first thing that comes to mind is just the yin yang. Like, that is literally a symbol of duality, that everything is everything, and with every side there is a seed of its opposition planted on that side. And there are no absolutes. There is no one way of doing anything. There is no, like, how do you define even right and wrong? There are, different types of morals that I subscribe to. Like, I never want to intentionally hurt anyone or hurt myself. And that's a great goal to have, intention to have with moving through life, I think. And the ways in which that is expressed or that comes up can be extremely variable. So, with the love for this duality, there's been a lot of letting go that I've had to navigate and practice, because letting go is not the easiest thing in the world for me, but it is very healthy to do in certain circumstances. And, I moved through season 1 of the podcast, was gearing up for season 2 pretty soon after season 1 had already wrapped. And travel on the horizon, and I started getting these pings to be getting ready to be out of control. And that just means being more flexible, being open to change, being ready and prepared to be at the whims and wills of the universe with whatever is in mind for me. And as I started traveling, sure enough, travel interruptions came up, or schedule changes, or things weren't feeling right or were feeling really right. And, some of the things that were coming up, there were logical explanations. And the even harder things to let go and be flexible with were the things that were not as obvious, uh were not as obvious, like turning points in the decision making process, or in how I needed to be making choices. So, travel is changing. I'm being flexible. I'm doing my darndest to remain at peace, calm, cool, and collected while all of these changes are happening, because I know I'm not the only one experiencing them. We're all navigating change in some capacity in our respective lives. And Tibetan Buddhism kept coming up. I've never had Tibetan Buddhism come up so much before in my life. And this summer was different. So I had already been having conversations about Buddhism, and about Tibet, actually, because I have a singing bowl. I have a Tibetan singing bowl, which someone corrected me recently. And it should be called a Himalayan singing bowl, because that's the region of mountains that the bowl came from. And it wasn't that, it's a very old bowl. So it was maybe Tibetan, maybe not, but from a cooperative of people in the mountains who made these beautiful bowls hundreds of years ago, and has found its way into my hands and my apartment in Miami, Florida, which is also just very wild to think about. And had someone also share a book with me that I haven't even gotten through once, because there's been a few points in reading this book where I've had to start over, or a section is so good that I just restart the section. So it's been a slow going process as I've been making my way through this text, but there's a lot, I mean, a majority of the premise of the book is the exploration of these bardos that exist in Tibetan Buddhism. And I believe there are 6 of them. And they're essentially frameworks to explain, give meaning, purpose to these gaps, these transitional gaps. So if we think about, life in general, a promise to everyone who is alive today is that you're born and you will die. So if we're alive or walking around, we're living, breathing, we have made it through the first gate, the birthing gate. Thanks, Mom. And eventually we will all pass through death. And that is the full, trajectory of our lives, each one of us. And so if we have this initial promise and we have this final promise, we have this whole area in between that is transitional and negotiable and malleable. And we can really do a lot in that space. And there are things that are in our control and there are things that are not in our control. And how do we hold ourselves? How do we decision make through that process? How do we write the story of our lives? And this sort of exploration into this way of thinking felt very full circle, because some years ago, I taught a class through my herbalism practice that was about herbs, but it was also about Jungian philosophies and storytelling and how we are narrators of our experiences. And if we were to try, like I did an exercise with the class, like if you were to try and characterize the narrator of your story, which is you, who is that version of yourself? And where are they going? Where do you want to be as the narrator? Are you sharing the story presently? Are you a version of yourself from the past? Are you a future version of yourself? Everything can be sculpted. And that class was super interesting. I actually only had one student in that class. So we got to kind of really deep dive those narratives for the two of us. And it was so cool to vocalize, I think for the first time, that way of thinking that I definitely subscribe to. And then also to hear this other person's take on their narrative and their life and their stories, the multiple stories that made up the big one. So that was a really fun experience to have. And it came up again while in this Tibetan Buddhism exploration that I was having this summer. And then this whole other layer for this spiritual practice came up as a friend of mine who I know to be a practitioner of this started to share different experiences that they were navigating and ask me to participate in some group prayers. And she is a very dear friend and was sort of talking through all of these deeply serendipitous moments that were happening as she was hyper present, as she had also experienced a large amount of very personal and deep grief, which I now see grief so differently. Like it feels like a portal and this really sobering experience where things just reveal themselves really quickly. Like if something is working out, again, it like doubles down. If something's not working out, it falls away fast or it really starts, you know, getting in the way of your life and like you got to cut it out. Um but it can be extremely illuminating in all of its heartbreak. So I urge anyone who's like going through a really hard time to just know there is a pot of gold at the end of the rainbow, or like you may be collecting the gold pieces as you're on your way down the rainbow. But I promise you, there are gifts in everything we experience, good, bad, otherwise. Gifts and lessons. Lessons are gifts. Grief is a universal experience. Just like the spectrums of emotions are promised to us, and then how we choose to navigate them is what's debatable. This is all conversational. But the Tibetan Buddhism piece kept on coming up. And I think that it is unintentionally informing, or I think it unintentionally began to form season 2 of the podcast as I was getting into it. And I can see now is fully a part of the undercurrent of a lot of these conversations and solo episodes. So, for anyone who is curious in Tibetan Buddhism, get in there. The book that I am referring to is right here. It's called In Love with the World, A Monk's Journey Through the Bardos of Living and Dying. And I will actually be saying a prayer later today, for a friend. And it will be a larger prayer moment. And I'm really excited to see where all of this love and intention continues to guide me. But for season 2, such cool guests, such, more great conversations. Some people are local here in Miami. Some people are out of the state, out of the country. But really foundational people in the world, in my world, maybe. Definitely learning really beautiful lessons from everyone who participated in both season 1 and season 2. This only feels like the beginning still, even though it's the second season. And I'm just really excited to continue to have these conversations with future guests and with everyone who's listening. I hope this episode finds you in a good place. I hope everyone's doing okay, taking care of themselves, and trusting that they're doing the best and the right thing for them. Okay. Well, I'm sending everyone a really big hug, and I'll see you next time.